Crop circles, patterns in fields which can appear overnight and without warning.
There's clearly intelligence behind crop circles. That's not the question. The question is, whose intelligence is it?
What are they, why are they there, and what could they possibly signify? And do they come from other worlds?
There are, without a doubt, lots of UFO sightings that take place.
Despite the admissions of hoaxers that the formulations are man-made, many still believe that they are signals from extraterrestrials.
To us, it looks like a field, but underneath, there's an interdimensional gate.
So are they caused by the weather, by UFOs, or by humans? Either way, they are unexplained. Crop circles. They appear abruptly in rural areas with no explanation behind them.
Crop circles are designs in grains, often wheat or barley, that appear in fields mysteriously. They range in complexity from very simple, small circles to really complex, amazing geometric patterns.
It's like almost woven like stitching or a cloth, or you'll have maybe one or two little strands just sitting there, and then there'll be a spiral around them.
Regardless of the specific design or pattern, which emerge over time, there's a handful of characteristics common to most crop circles. One is that most of them are circles, or involve circles. There are more complex ones. There's straight lines, there's triangles, but the vast majority of them are in fact circles.
Just from a simple artistic look and feel, it's wonderful to see these designs. So on that level alone, it provides a wonderful spiritual enhancement of amazement.
These spectacular designs in fields of crops are artistic, dramatic, and often geometrically precise. But are they the work of humans, or are they the marks of visitors from other planets?
People have always tried to find physical evidence that flying saucers and UFOs have been here. And naturally, when people see these amazing formations in the crops, people will associate those with something supernatural and something that came from the sky. They look like the classic George Adamski flying saucer from the 1950s.
Crop circles are surrounded by confusion, just like the alien spaceships of the mid-20th century.
It's quite interesting, really, to kind of hark back to the original time when the word flying saucer entered the language, because this was back in 1947, when Kenneth Arnold saw these mysterious craft flying at amazing speeds and amazing maneuvers. And when he reported this to the press, he said that the motion was like a saucer skipping across a lake. But he wasn't talking about the shape of the craft. He was talking about the motion. And yet that phrase flying saucer, the media loved it. And then afterwards, people actually reported seeing circular craft, whereas the craft that Kenneth Arnold had seen were actually more like boomerangs. But that became forgotten, and now everybody sees flying saucers.
Some historians claim that the phenomena have been appearing for centuries. But have they?
It's a tough question to answer, how long have crop circles been with us, because it really depends on how you look at it. There's famously a woodcut from the year 1678.
The legend is that a farmer was arguing with one of his helpers who wanted more money to harvest the field, and there was a big fight, and the farmer said, "I'd rather pay the devil himself to mow my field than to pay you to do it." Sure enough, the next morning, the oats were cut, and it was the devil himself. If you look at the woodcut, the image depicts the devil, Satan himself, with a scythe cutting the oats.
So when did they first appear? As far as we know, the first known circles of the modern age were seen in Australia, circular formations in swamp reeds.
A farmer saw a UFO shooting up into the sky.
His name was George Pedley.
He claimed to have heard what he thought was a hissing sound. In the aftermath of that, he went over to the area where he believed he heard the sound come from and found this perfectly circular formation, about 9 meters or 30 feet in diameter. It was quite large. when you really think about this, a very significant size. And that became known as the Tully Saucer Circle. And actually further investigation by Pedley and other people found that there were actually a series of these. There were a number of circular formations, mostly smaller than the original one. The RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, actually did investigate this. They didn't come up with any explanation as to what would have caused this, but you get the idea that they were sort of nonchalant in their approach to this, saying, well, this kind of thing has happened before during the wet season.
But what can explain the Australian circles?
There have been a variety of explanations that have been offered to explain the Tully saucer nest, none of which really persuaded too many people. Then you've got theories like whirlwinds or vortices of some sort, some kind of natural, maybe wind formation. Also, really, that's a bit of a stretch, it seems to me. To more mechanistic explanations, as in someone's technology, whether flying saucers, which that's an easy one to see why, since you have the witness having seen one. We don't really have a simple explanation, a conventional explanation, I should say, that everyone can agree with.
The Tully saucer nest aside, these extraordinary happenings only really came to public attention in the second half of the 20th century.
Crop circles really genuinely began in the 1970s. There's others elsewhere in Europe, but for the most part, it's as British as tea.
Crop circles are a very important part of British culture, and especially this area. I mean, Wiltshire is like crop circle country.
By the mid and late 1980s, they started to become really complex. And that's when this whole phenomenon really became very, very interesting to follow. You could argue, or kind of a vortex theory, sort of a naturalistic Earth phenomenon where these things would somehow be created, and some people were very drawn to that. The problem with that theory became very evident once you start seeing like 4 circles in a perfect pattern, and then with lines connecting them.
Then things really started to take off.
Suddenly there was a rectangular crop circle. It's not a crop circle, but you know, it was like the face of Mars, and then suddenly there was another one in the same field that looked like a message sent out in space, and you got very intricate ones with amazing kind of geometry behind it.
And also becoming enormous in size. And then you start getting even very more sophisticated mathematical expressions of these. So obviously the vortex explanation really kind of fell apart at that point.
The crop circles largely appeared close to sites with spiritual connections.
The large number of them take place in the region around Wiltshire, where you've got Stonehenge, where you've got a lot of other very interesting ancient evidences of early Celtic and pre-Celtic culture. So the question is that important? And then there's a theory of ley lines, and whether or not that's really a legitimate connection is something that no one's really been able to figure this out.
But how can these extraordinary designs appear, seemingly out of nowhere? Are they caused by extraterrestrial beings and miraculous occurrences? Or are they human hoaxes?
It just seemed to appear instantly out of nowhere in broad daylight.
Is this really happening?